Hello everyone, and welcome to the Commander's Forge. My name is Andrew Bentley, and I am your host. Now, the Commander's Forge is an area for me to talk about magic and Commander in the ways that I enjoy it. Now, last week I got kind of heavy in what we talked about. And this week, I think we're just going to chill. We're just going to talk about, well, things that I heard on another podcast. Earlier this week, I listened to Shivam Butt's podcast, Casual Magic. And he had Alex Kessler on, which I'm a big fan of both of these men. I've met both of them personally, and they are great people. And they were talking about how GPs and Magic Fests had changed in the last few years to really embrace Commander players. And it really resonated with me because they were talking about GPLA back in 2017, which I had flown out to LA so I could be at. And they were talking about how they were packed into the cafeteria fighting for space, and I was right there with them. I was one of the first people that kind of took over the cafeteria. But regardless, it brought back all these memories. That's where I first met Zach and Ryan from the Commander Social podcast. Originally, I had flown out and stayed with Phil DeLuca for GPLA the year before that. It just really got me thinking that, well, I understand the Magic community has its bad apples, and it has people that can really grind your gears the wrong way. This community is one of the best that I am a part of. Everything from meeting them years ago and forming lasting relationships in our limited contact to them remembering who I am on Twitter, which is just ridiculous. People recognize my username, which just blows my mind. And I really do owe this community a lot for helping me out of a lot of mental instability in the past. I just wanted to say after last week's episode that this community really has been one of the best things to happen to me ever. Now, enough with the sad, sappy stuff. I was on the Guardian Project's Commander stream last week, and we ended up playing 3 games instead of the normal 2 games. And I just want to let you know that they should have the VOD up on YouTube, I believe sometime next week. I will give you one quick spoiler. I did not win any of the games, but they were a lot of fun. And if you're ever looking for something to do on a Thursday night, they usually stream at 8 p.m. Eastern. But man, this community is the reason I even eventually made this podcast. And while, yes, The plans for this podcast aren't exactly where it ended up. Originally, it was supposed to be me and Dan Kraus several years ago, and we just couldn't mesh up our schedules. One of us was always busy. My work schedule was insane. I'm in a much better place now than I have been in many years. I just wanted to let you guys know that. Now, back to some magic stuff. We are going to kick this to a quick mid-roll ad, and then we're going to talk about some elves. Hi. If you haven't heard about Anchor, let me tell you some of the reasons why I started using it. For one, it's free. There's no subscription fee. You don't have to pay for anything. Second, it gives you all of the editing software you need for everything you're going to do. Beyond that, it helps distribute your podcast to so many different places, including Spotify, Google Podcasts, Apple Podcasts. It's amazing. Not only that, but they offer to sponsor you. Right there. That's it. Just by recording podcasts, they will pay you based on the number of listens it gets. It brings everything you need into one place. And if you want to try it out, you can download their app, or you can go to anchor.fm to get started. Now back to the episode. And welcome back. Now, let's talk about elves. Back when the mono green elf precon released, I picked it up and I played that for about a year before I decided that I wanted to add a second color. So I added black by changing the commander to Nath of the Guiltleaf. Now, this didn't go over well with a lot of people because they always assumed that I was playing a discard deck where I was actually just playing an elf deck. So I still wanted to play Golgari Elves, so I was looking around and I found Rhys the Exiled, which is a elf warrior. He's a 3/2 for 2 and a green, and whenever he attacks, you gain 1 life for each elf you control, and you can pay a black to and sacrifice an elf to regenerate Rhys the Exiled. He's not the greatest, but he's also not the scariest. And I can tend to do some of my tricksy stuff before people are like, oh, we need to deal with the elf player. Now, we have some mana dorks. And I'm not going to go over all the mana dorks because there's far too many. But I do want to point out a few, like Marwyn the Nurturer, which is a 1/1 elf druid for 2 and a green that says whenever another elf enters the battlefield under your control, you put a +1/+1 counter on Marwyn the Nurturer, and you can tap to add an amount of green equal to Marwyn's power. As you can guess, this deck likes to put creatures on the board, and if I get a turn 3 Marwyn, it's usually got 6 power by turn 5-ish. Next, we have our Priest of Titania. She is an 1/1 elf druid for 1 and a green, and she says tap, add green to your mana pool for each elf on the battlefield. Notice this does not say each elf on your battlefield. It hits for all elves on the battlefield. Next, we have Elvish Archdruid, which is 2/2 elf druid for 1 green green. He says tap, add a green for each elf you control. But he's also a lord and says other elf creatures you control get +1/+1. Then we have the new Canopy Tactician from Kaldheim, which is a 3/3 elf warrior for 3 and a green that taps to add 3 green and says other elves you control get +1/+1. And then we have what I consider one of the best mana dorks, and that's Heritage Druid, which is a 1/1 elf druid for a single green mana, and it says tap 3 untapped elves you control, add green, green, green to your mana pool. Now, what makes that great is the creatures can be tapped even if they have summoning sickness because you're tapping them to her ability. And I used to play Elves in Legacy, which is where some of the other stuff in the deck comes from. But it's where I learned how to play with the Heritage Druid and a few other tricksy untap abilities. That said, we do have a couple other creatures that are lords that I want to talk about. The first one is Dwynen, the Guiltleaf Daean. She's an elf warrior for 2 green green, and she's a 3/4. She has reach. Other elf creatures you control get +1/+1, and whenever Guiltleaf Daean attacks, you gain 1 life for each attacking elf you control, which is the second elf that says you gain life when you attack. People like to lower the life total of the elf deck. I like having those to kind of boost it up. Next we have Joraga Warcaller, which is a 1/1 elf warrior for a single green. He has multi-kicker, 1 and a green, and that means you can pay an additional 1 and a green any number of times as you cast the spell. The Warcaller enters the battlefield with a +1/+1 counter on it for each time it was kicked. Now that's important because other elf creatures you control get +1/+1 for each +1/+1 counter on Joraga Warcaller. And there are a few other ways to throw counters around in the deck. The one I want to point out right now is Leyline of Abundance, which is an enchantment for 2 green green. But if the Leyline is in your hand, your opening hand, you can begin with it on the battlefield. Whenever you tap a creature for mana, you add an additional green, and you can pay 6 green green to put a +1/+1 counter on each creature you control. So if you have Joraga Warcaller and a bunch of other elves, you activate this ability, he goes up by 1, they all go up by 2. Now, the thing about elves is they are very versatile. Back when I was playing Legacy Elves, one of the cards that the deck was based around is Glimpse of Nature, which is a single green sorcery that says, whenever you play a creature spell this turn, draw a card. And you can chain this into so many cards as long as you have a decently full hand. You keep drawing more cards, you keep accruing more mana, and again, untap shenanigans to make more mana. Kind of like this next card, Quest for Renewal, which is an enchantment for 1 and a green. And whenever a creature you control becomes tapped, you may put a quest counter on Quest for Renewal. And as long as there are 4 or more quest counters on Quest for Renewal, you untap all creatures you control during each other player's untap step. Yeah, and there's a few other creatures that have tap abilities that do something. I think my favorite one to pair with that is Imperious Perfect, which is an elf warrior. It's a 2/2 for 2 and a green, and it says other elf creatures you control get +1/+1, but you can pay a green and tap it to put a 1/1 green elf warrior creature token onto the battlefield. So getting to untap every turn with that and a mana dork means that I, in one turn cycle of the table, will come out with 3 more elves. And that's kind of what we want to do. We want to make more elves. One of the ways we can do this is with Harold, King of Skemfar. He is a elf warrior. He's a 3/2. He costs 1 black-green. He has Menace, and when he enters the battlefield, you look at the top 5 cards of your library. You can reveal an elf, warrior, or Tyvar card from among them and put it into your hand. Put the rest on the bottom of your library in a random order. This is just getting more elves into your hand. Next, we have Lasalana Huntmaster, which is an elf warrior. It's a 3/3 for 2 green. And whenever you cast an elf spell, you may put a 1/1 green elf warrior creature token onto the battlefield. Again, exponentially growing elves. Then, in addition to things like Well-Wisher, which is an elf that taps to gain life for each creature you control, for each elf you control. We also have Immaculate Magistrate, which is an elf shaman. It's a 2/2 and costs 3 and a green. But you can tap it to put a +1/+1 counter on target creature for each elf you control. And this doesn't say on a creature you control, and can be used politically if you aren't so inclined. Now, we have, honestly, my favorite card that I own is in this deck. And it is an Italian Sylvan Library, which is Biblioteca Silvestre. It costs 1 and a green. It's an enchantment. And during your draw step, you draw 2 additional cards. Then, for each card you keep past the first one, you take 4 damage. The number of times where I've just snap kept 3 elves and said, yeah, I'll take 8 is a lot. A lot of our elves are on the cheap side. So I am running Collected Company, which is 3 and a green instant to look at the top 6 cards of your library and put 2 creature cards with converted mana cost 3 or less from among them onto the battlefield and put the rest on the bottom of your library. Yeah. Now, we talked about getting more elves, and we're running an instant that even when I cast it and it's not great, it still does fun stuff. I think I cast it once when I only had like 5 elves, maybe 6. And that's Kindred Summons. It's 5 green for an instant. And you choose a creature type. Then you reveal cards from the top of your library and you reveal X creature cards of the chosen type, where X is the number of creatures you control of that type. Put them onto the battlefield, then shuffle the rest of the revealed cards into your library. This card ends games, especially when I can cast it on the end step of my opponent's turn. Okay, let's round this out, talking about how we're going to end the game. But before we can talk about the cards we're going to use to end the game, we have to talk about the cards we're going to use to find the cards that we're going to use to end the game. First up, we have Diabolic Intent, which is 1 and a black. It's a sorcery. Has an additional cost to cast the spell, sacrifice a creature. Search your library for a card, put the card in your hand, then shuffle your library. Next, we have Green Sun Zenith. It's X and a green for a sorcery that says search your library for a green creature with converted mana cost X or less. put it onto the battlefield, then shuffle your library, shuffle Green Sun Zeniths into its owner's library. The third one is Chord of Calling, which is X green, green, green for an instant with Convoke. Convoke means that your creatures can help cast the spell. Each creature you tap pays for 1 or 1 mana of that creature's color. And again, you search your library for a creature card with a converted mana cost X or less, and put it onto the battlefield, then shuffle your library. And the last one is Natural Order, which is 2 green, green for a sorcery. As an additional cost to cast Natural Order, sacrifice a green creature, search your library for a green creature card, put it onto the battlefield, and then shuffle your library. Now you may ask, which green creatures might we grab, especially at instant speed with Chord of Calling? Well, the first one is Abomination of Llanowar, which is 1, a black, and a green for a star elf horror. And it really puts the image to Elf Ball. It has Vigilance and Menace, and the Abomination of Llanowar's power and toughness are each equal to the number of elves you control, plus the number of elf cards in your graveyard. He gonna be big boy. Next we have the usual suspects. The first one being Izuri, Renegade Leader. 1 green, green for a 2/2 elf warrior that says pay a green and regenerate another target elf. He also has, for 2 green, 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 elf creatures you control get +3/+3 and trample until end of turn. And we can make a ton of mana. Yeah. And last but not least, we have the big ol' Mac Daddy himself, Craterhoof Behemoth. Or, as I like to call it, Hoof. There it is. It's a 5/5 beast for 5 green, green, green. That would be 8. It has haste. And when it enters the battlefield, creatures you control gain trample and get +X/+X till end of turn, where X is the number of creatures you control. So, Hoof. There it is. Now, if you want to take a look at the full deck list, that will be in the description. A quick reminder that if you enjoyed it, consider subscribing, hit the like button, maybe leave me a comment, and I will see you next time. That brings us to the end of the podcast. I would like to thank Nate and Erica Jacobs for designing my logo, and Cody Mulphy and Ian Foss for allowing me to use a sample of music from their band The Crypt. The podcast can be found on YouTube by searching Commander's Forge. The podcast is Commander's Forge, that is CMDR_Forge on Twitter. I can be found on Twitter at Bentzmister, that is BENTZMR. Thank you for listening. I'll see you next time, and until then, here's to fun games and sick plays.